and Zohar, that's where his worldliness came from. That's where his universality came from. It didn't come from reading Kant and Hegel and Locke, and he never read Socrates or Aristotle. He never had a secular education. It's interesting that many of his opponents, his bitter opponents, the German Jews, for instance, that represented, to a certain extent, the right wing of the Aguda in Europe. The Germans were more right-wing than the Poles and the Russians and the Lithuanians. They were much more worldly people. They all had a worldly education. They all were college graduates. They all were professionals. They knew Schiller and Goethe. They could read it in Heine. They could read it in the original German. Rav Kook was not only innocent of all of that, he was beyond it. But his worldliness stemmed from his understanding of Torah and of the mission of Torah and the Jewish people. And in fact, I think that was probably one of his most infuriating characteristics, if I may say so. Because, for instance, when Rabbi Hertzel became the chief rabbi of Palestine, succeeding Rabbi Kook, everybody said he's a doctor, he's a PhD, so you can't expect anything more, right? And that's why he got along much better and was much less of a controversial person. And he was able to have, relatively speaking, very smooth sailing. Because, you couldn't think he was a doctor, right? He was a PhD, so what can you do? He was gechat. But Rav Kook was kula Torah. And therefore, that alone, it was a different type of Torah personality, that alone caused controversy. Is very grandeur. I will talk about it in a moment. The Ger Rebbe, when he met him, was the opinion that he said about him. So he became the Rav not just for Yaffo, he became the Rav for the colonies that surrounded Yaffo, for the agricultural settlements. And he did Herculean work. He also saw himself as the representative of Torah Judaism in an age of transition. And he saw himself as its spokesman. Now, whether he had a right to see himself that way or not is debatable. But that is how he saw himself. And therefore, there was no public issue that he was silent about. Issues which have, in the traditional sense, had nothing to do with the rabbinate. Rav Kook wrote long letters about the rights of workers, about fair wages, about working conditions, about relationships with the Arabs, about the diplomacy of the Zionist movement, all of which have nothing to do with being the Rav in Yaffo. When he wrote those letters, so he was resented naturally by the secularists who said, what's this rabbi doing poking his nose into our business? Let him stick to learning Gemara. Let him not tell us what labor law should be. Let him not tell us how we should deal with the Arabs. That's none of his business. So again, it's the universality of his personality. It's the fact that he felt that everything was on the table, so to speak, as far as he was concerned. And that his opinion as the spokesman of Jewry regarding these issues was important and had to be said. That itself made him very controversial. That himself raised the hackles on both sides. So all of his life, he will find himself in this situation. But what Rav Kook had going for him was Rav Kook, basically. Rav Kook is not a movement. You see, there are people who can make a movement. The movement moves on after them. But Rav Kook could not make a movement. Rav Kook was only Rav Kook. After him, there was there is no successor. And that personality, that combination of Torah greatness, of piety, of mysticism, of poetry, of leadership, of oratory, all rolled into one person, so that couldn't be imitated. And it never has been imitated since. So Rav Kook could be the chief rabbi, as when we discussed the chief rabbi. And Rav Kook was the chief rabbi. He was elected unanimously. There was not another candidate. But the chief rabbinate is a different story completely. Part of the naivete that many great people have, we find it by Moshe too. Chazal tell us, the rabbis tell us that Moshe said to the Jewish people, what does God want from you? He only wants him liyira, so that you should only have fear of the Rabbanu Shalom. So the Talmud says, V'chi yira milsa zutrasahi, is fear of God a small thing? You know, he only wants you to fear. I mean, that's the greatest thing. That's what we all try to do, is to have a little yira shamayim, to have a little fear of heaven. A Jew that has a little fear of heaven, he made it. What do you mean, after all? So the Talmud tells us, Ein, lagabe Moshe milsa zutrasahi. By Moshe, it was a small thing. Moshe didn't realize how great Moshe was. The idea of a great person is that he doesn't realize his own greatness. He's naive about himself. He thinks if he can do it, everybody can do it. I used to have a Rebbe like that. I had a Rebbe, Rogoff could learn 26 hours out of 24. But he didn't need anything else. He didn't need sleeping, eating, nothing. He was the man with kulotay. He was only Torah. And we were, I wouldn't say we were a little deficient, but, we had other, we were 16 years old, 17 years old this year. So it came the 4th of July. And I remember the Cubs had a big doubleheader the 4th of July, and so we figured we'll go to the yeshiva in the morning, we'll be there at 1 o'clock, we'll do the Rebbe a favor, and the doubleheader starts 1:30, we'll all go, it's the 4th of July. So when the shiur was over, he saw that we were all getting ready to go. He said, where are you going? So we told him, Rebbe, we got to go somewhere. We never explained to him about the Cubs. That was beyond. We couldn't figure out how to do that. So we saw that he literally could not understand how people could leave the Beit HaMedrash and not learn Torah. How they could pick themselves up and go to... He said it, you have to... Because he knew school was over. All year round he said never have to go to school or something. But now he knew school was over. It's a nice day. Well, where are they going? How can it be that they're not going to sit and learn? Greatness breeds a certain naivete about others. And Rav Kook had that too. Rav Kook thought, since it was a snap for him, or it was part of his idea, so he thought, so there'll always be, there's enough to go be another one. And he didn't realize that he was the only one. And because of that, therefore, all of the organization, so to speak, that he created never reached fruition after his death because the organization was him. It wasn't the organization. Rav Kook, for instance, was beyond, what shall we say, personal corruption isn't even the word, but he was beyond any influence. So you couldn't reach him in any way by considerations which ordinary mortals may have. His father-in-law once said on him that I cannot say that my son-in-law is a sonei betza. Sonei betza is mentioned in the Torah as someone that hates bribery, that hates corruption. He said, I cannot say that my son-in-law hates corruption because he doesn't know what corruption is. He hasn't got an inkling of what it is. And therefore, that type of a personality and that type of an achievement was really his strong point. So he became involved in a number of major issues right in the beginning of his rabbanus, as I have mentioned. One of the issues was that he was one of the great patriots of Esrogim from the land of Israel. And he wrote to all the rabbis in the exile to make sure that they bought esrogim only from Israel. He held that the only kosher esrogim were from Israel. And he really mounted a tremendous campaign. When it came time for the question of the renewal of the hertzel of the shmita, which Rav Kook had instituted in the 1880s, and which had been a source of controversy in the rabbinic world. He wrote a famous book called Shabbos Ha'oretz, which still is the definitive work on the question of shmita and the question of the hertzel of selling the land to a non-Jew for the shmita year. He was its foremost defendant. And in effect, Rabbi Yisrael hertzel turned into Rav Kook's hertzel, because he's the one who expanded it and defended it and wrote about it and argued about it with those who opposed him, the Ridvaz and Sfas and other Rabbonim who opposed him. He was the point man. He took all the pressure in order to defend what he felt was right. He wrote a sefer Pri Hodor, again on the kashrus of the Israeli etrogim, and on the general rule of eating fruits from Eretz Yisrael. There's a legend told about him that he had two children. He had a son and a daughter. So his daughter once was eating Israeli olives that were grown in Eretz Yisrael, and she had a bad olive or a sour olive. So she made a face. She said, "Look, it's terrible, the fruit." He said, "You're not allowed to say on any fruit that grows in the land of Israel it's terrible. The only thing you can say is that I don't like it. But you cannot characterize the fruit as being terrible if it grew in the land of Israel." To him, that wasn't a show. That's not Zionist propaganda. That was him. That's the way he saw it, the way he felt it. But the major change in his personality, which was the major issue upon which his life really was built from here on, was that he was convinced that the return to the land of Israel was part already of the Messianic process. He was convinced of that. And therefore, everything that occurred regarding Zionism, everything that occurred regarding the rebuilding of Israel, everything that occurred regarding the Jewish situation in the world, he saw it in that context. In this, he differed greatly from the other religious Zionists. For instance, Rabbi Reines, who was the founder of the Mizrahi, said openly many times that this is not a messianic issue, and that the program of the Mizrahi is not based on the fact that this is a messianic time, or that somehow this will even hasten the Messiah. He said it's only a practical solution to a terrible problem. What to do with the Jewish people, how to get them out of Eastern Europe, how to get them productive. So this is an answer, and this is the answer that we support. But it has nothing to do with religion, so to speak. It has nothing to do with any messianic qualities. Rav Kook is the one that made the revolution in religious Zionism, and because he is the one that infused it with messianic fervor. And because of that viewpoint, therefore, he said, and he saw it in cosmic terms, he saw it in supernatural terms, he saw it in Kabbalistic terms. He didn't see it in the ordinary sense of what was happening in front of his eyes. So he said everything that's happening is part of the Messianic process. Even what's bad on the surface, what's wrong, also has a positive element in it, because it's hastening, it's bringing us closer to that redemptive moment. And therefore, he saw in the Zionist movement, which by this time had turned secularist and anti-religious, and as we will see, bitterly anti-religious, and which therefore now many of its previous religious adherents now began to defect from it, and a large part of religious Jewry now stood in opposition to it. He didn't get nervous from it. He said that doesn't count. What they say and how they behave, none of that counts, because Zionism is part of the Messianic process, and therefore it has to be encouraged and supported, because it hastens the redemption of the Jewish people. Now, that was a revolutionary idea, and that's an idea that's bound to bring about reactions from all sides. It brought about reactions from the religious, who felt that how could the Messianic process be furthered by the desecration of the Shabbos and by the desecration of everything that was holy in Jewish life. And it also brought about from the secularists a terrible reaction because they didn't, if anything, they didn't want to be part of the Messianic process. To them, that was bad news. They wanted to be part of Marx's utopia, but they didn't want to be part of David's heart. That really had no place for them. So again, you see Rav Kook is caught in the middle with with what is really a revolutionary idea. But his idea prevailed. I think that it would be fair to say that his philosophy of the matter affected religious Zionism more than any other viewpoint. And it remains today as part of the mystery of what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on. The Zionists came to make a new Jew. A new Jew, that's how they phrased it. Yehudi Chadash. Brand new Jew. To make the new Jew, he had to get rid of the old Jew. He got rid of the old Jew. The old Jew was bent over, and he had a long nose, and he smelled, and he came from the ghetto, and he spoke Yiddish, and he was afraid of Goyim, and he was a schnorrer, and he was a botlin. We got to get rid of all of that. We're going to make a new Jew that's going to be 6 foot tall. He's going to be blonde. He's going to be a farmer. He's going to be able to inspire confidence, and he'll put fear in the hearts of enemies, and he'll have all the grandeur of Jewish culture with him. But no Torah. No Torah, no God, no tradition, no history. The Zionist Jew began in 1900. Nothing happened until 1900. He was born with Hertzel. That was the new Jew that they were going to create. And one of the leading spokesmen of Zionism, the man who single-handedly is responsible for the Hebrew language being the official language of the Zionist movement in the state of Israel, his name was Eliezer ben Yehuda, who single-handedly was Meshuggah so Dover. That was his obsession. So he single-handedly brought Hebrew and Sephardic Hebrew as the language of the new Jew. So he wrote in one of his letters, I want to read it to you. He, by the way, he supported Uganda. He supported Uganda as the Jewish state at the time of the dispute in the Zionist movement whether to accept Uganda or not. So he was one of those who supported Uganda. So when the Eastern European Zionists, who, no matter how new Jew they weren't ready to trade the land of Israel for Uganda. I mean, that new Jew they couldn't be yet. Today, today 5 guys met with Arafat, right? They could do that. They're new Jew enough that, doesn't make a difference. They'd go to Bali anywhere. But the Eastern European Jews, Weitzman and the others, couldn't reconcile themselves to Uganda. So they wrote polemics against Ben Yehuda. So Ben Yehuda wrote back, and Ben Yehuda had a tremendous pen, and he was also the editor of a paper in Israel. And he wrote them, he said, you guys are hypocrites. Onu kulonu paninu olef lehoavar. All of us together have turned our backs on the past. Not just the Ugandans. You guys also. Our slogan is that we have turned our back on the past. And that is our pride and our glory, that we have no past. Terrible word. But if you hear those words, you understand where we're coming from today. Today, it's 85 years later. Now the price is being paid. So Rav Kook answered him. So the other rabbis, they put him in Chayrim, I say it's, hell with him. What good is he? Why even bother to respond? But Rav Kook wrote an open letter, and he spread it throughout. He had it printed, and he sent it throughout Israel, and he sent it to all of the secular kibbutzim, to all of the colonies, to all of the settlements. He didn't send it to the Beis Medrash to put it up on the wall, or to the mikveh that they put it up Friday afternoon and everybody would read it. And he wrote there, Zuhi chutzpah she'einena mitzuya. He says this is a chutzpah that's even for the Jewish people. It's a chutzpah. It's out of the bounds. He said that there can be no future without our past, and that anyone that says that he turns his back on the Jewish past will have no Jewish future. And he said that if the Zionist movement believes that way, then they are doomed to failure. And in it, he said again his idea about the messianic quality of Zionism, that its only reason for existence is that it is a vehicle, so to speak, that God is using to bring about the Jewish redemption. But that without that, it has no raison d'etre, it has no reason to exist, it cannot exist, it will not exist, it will fail. He writes almost prophetically that even if it succeeds, he says it will fail. So again, to us, the echo of that rings in our ears. Because we know now that even if we succeeded, it could be that chas v'sholem, God forbid, we have failed. But this viewpoint, so when he wrote this letter, he received the approbation of all of the rabbis in the world and all the rabbis in Jerusalem. There's a whole list here of the great rabbis who were not necessarily philosophically aligned with him, but because he's the only one that took, and he took Ben Yehuda on better Hebrew than Ben Yehuda could write, which was part of it. He was a great linguist. I mean, anyone who reads, the problem with reading Rav Kook is that his words and his language is so beautiful that you read 5 pages and you're so impressed by the beauty, then you say, hey, what did he say here? You know, you don't stop to figure out what he's saying because the language goes so. It has such a power to it. The greatest men of Jerusalem wrote him. Rabbi Petterberger was then in Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. Rabbi Yerucham Yitzchak Diskin. All those who represented the old Yerushalayim, they sent him enormous letters of thanks over what he occurred. It is at this time that Rav Kook began to sign his letters, Eved La'am HaKodesh Be'eretz HaKodesh, a servant to the holy people in the Holy Land. Later, when he became the Rav in Jerusalem, he would sign Bahar HaKodesh in the Holy Mountain. So he always signed himself as an Eved, as a servant. That's how he saw himself. His opponents for Purim sent him in a get shichur. They sent him in a mock emancipation document so that he would no longer have to be a servant to the holy people. But he saw himself in those terms as being a servant of the Jewish people and a servant of the Jewish future. That's how he always saw himself. It's interesting that he did not see himself limited to the colonies around Yaffo either. In 1911, we have a letter that he wrote to the village of Rosh Pina in the Galil, and he said, my Rabbonis is not just in Yaffo or the colonies. My Rabbonis is in the Galil too. My Rabbonis is wherever there are any Jews who are doing anything positive, then I'm with you. And I'm responsible for you. And I have a right to tell you what I feel and to communicate with you, and you have a right to ask of me whatever I can do for you. That's, again, like a it's a super ego, but it's a super Rabbonis as well. Something that most people were not, certainly most rabbis were not accustomed. Nobody Nobody saw himself in that fashion. He also said that public figures, anybody who is privileged to be a public figure by the Jewish people, has to know that he is chosen for that. His words were that in heaven they announce, he said, like a person is called up for an aliyah to the Torah. So when the halacha is that if you're called up for an aliyah to the Torah, you have to go. You can't say, I don't want this aliyah. You have to go. So he said in heaven, before a person receives public appointment, they announce, Ya'amod so-and-so. He's going to be the gabbai, he's going to be the president, he's going to be the rabbi, he's going to be the principal. So he said that's a heavenly calling. It's not an election of people. The people only confirm what has already been decided in heaven. And therefore, he says, a person has to be able to see himself in that light. He has to see himself in that greatness. And because of that, therefore, his influence did expand. He, even before the First World War, 1911, 1912, 1913, he was the main Rav in Eretz Yisrael. And even the Rabbonim in Yerushalayim held that Rav Kook was the representative of Rabbonah, certainly to the non-religious world, but even in the religious world, even though there may have been greater people than he, and they may have felt in learning or in piety, etc., but in leadership, no one challenged his leadership. It will only be after the First World War, with the creation of the chief rabbinate, that the schism will take place, that the entire separation of the two groups will take place. But before the First World War, that was not the case at all. In 1909, there arose, in the question of creating the new Jew, so there arose a movement among the Zionist movement, led by Arthur Ruppin, the hydroelectric engineer, the Ruppin Works, and he made the first dam at the Jordan River. He was one of the famous early Zionists in Israel. So he proclaimed that the Jewish people need a new set of laws. He called it HaMishpat HaIvri. They need a Hebrew system of justice, because he said it's inconceivable that the new Jew could be governed by the laws or by the sense of justice of the Torah and of the Shulchan Aruch, because we forgot all of that. And it would be wrong that they should be governed by the laws of Turkey or by the laws of Germany. So they had to create a new system. And they made a commission to do so. That commission, I believe, is still meeting. It's already, it's 80 years, and no one has come up with it. Israel still has a hodgepodge of Turkish and English and Jewish law. I mean, it's the biggest chon in the world. Because on one hand, to admit that the laws of the Torah should pertain, so the secularists are not willing to do that. That's not consistent with being a new Jew. On the other hand, the laws that looked so great and appealing in the 1920s or 30s and the 1980s are anachronisms. So again, Rav Kook is the one that took the offensive against Rupin, and he wrote a stinging rebuke, and he wrote a famous defense of halacha, of Jewish law, and he called it Vashiva Shoftayich Kevarishona, based on the words of the Navi Yeshayahu, that the process of redemption, part of the process of redemption is that God promised us that he will restore our judges and our system of justice as it was originally, as it was in the time of Moshe and Yoshua and David, in the time of the Sanhedrin. And again, we find Rav Kook on the firing line, so to speak. As early as 1910, we already envisioned the idea of the chief rabbinate. That in order to raise the honor of the rabbinate, and in order to make the rabbinate an effective tool in a modern society, and in order to a certain extent to create a new rabbi, which he also felt was necessary to deal with the changing situation. So it had to be institutionalized, organized in an organization. It had to be special. It could no longer be the way it was in Europe, in the ghetto. But in 1909 and 1910 and 1911, there was no governmental structure that could effectuate it. 10 years later, there would be such a governmental structure under the British mandate, and he would push for it and have it established. In 1913, he organized, together with Rav Chaim Sonnenfeld, who was the head of the Eda Haredis in Yerushalayim, and with Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Chalap, who was one of the leading Rabbonim in Yerushalayim. These three rabbis, they went on what was called the Masa HaTshuva, the trip for Tshuva. And they went to 36 Jewish settlements all over the country to speak to the settlers regarding observance of Jewish law, regarding building a shul, regarding having a kosher kitchen, regarding building a mikveh, regarding observance of the Shabbos. Now, it's interesting that we're talking here in the end of 1913, the beginning of 1914, and that these three men, who were three different people completely and three different philosophies, combined, and all three agreed that a great deal was accomplished, as it was. Over 12 synagogues were built out of this. 6 of the places agreed to put in kosher kitchens. 2 mikvahs were built. In general, the fact that 3 such rabbis could come to such a place, and people came. He describes in one of his trips the boycott. They went to one place and nobody came. They said the rabbis are going to speak 7 o'clock at night. Only a rabbi knows that feeling. Nobody came. 0. They boycotted it. So, the barrel wine would have gotten on the wagon and gone home. So what they did is they slept over, and the next morning they came to breakfast. They didn't eat because it wasn't kosher. They came to breakfast, and they had a captive audience, and they did it there. And they said, "What do you mean?" Rav Kook, he was a very clever person. He had a good sense of humor. So he said, you must have got your dates crossed up. He said, because you don't say, if you say in the morning, Hayom Yom Shlishi V'Shabbos, Hayom Yom Revi V'Shabbos, you know what day it is. But here, since nobody says Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi, you undoubtedly got mixed up. So you didn't know what day it is, so we came to you instead of your coming to us. But it's again, if that spirit could somehow be recaptured, again, if you had that kind of people, it would have been different. Rav Kook was invited in 1914 to attend the World Convention of Agudas Yisrael. Rav Kook was not a Mizrahi. That's one of the mistakes. Rav Kook was not a political person. He didn't belong to any political party. The Mizrahi claimed him, but he never claimed the Mizrahi. And he was invited to come to the Aguda convention, and he left to go. He went to Germany, and from Germany he was going to attend the convention, and the First World War broke out. When the First World War broke out, so Turkey was involved in the war. The Ottoman Empire was involved with the Central Powers, and because of that, therefore, he could not return. Turkey did not allow any of the Jews that were out of the country to return. The same thing happened with Ben Gurion, with Ben Tzvi, with others. They couldn't get back in the country. Anybody that was out couldn't get back. And Rav Kook spent 5 years outside the country. The first 2 years he spent in Switzerland. First in Zurich, and then he became the Rav in a small village called San Galan in Switzerland. He said that in retrospect, he said that what was he doing in Switzerland? He said there was one soul that he had to save. And that was the famous Rabbi David Hacohen, the Nazir, the Nazarite. This David Hacohen was one of the most original, nonconformist, different geniuses that the Jewish people had in the 20th century. He was born in Lithuania. His father was a Rav in Lithuania. He went to great yeshivas. He went to Volozhin. He went to other yeshivas, Slobodka. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. And he was a genius. So that by the time he was 18, he was known as the Yui from this and this town. And then he dropped it all, as was not uncommon in that time. The yeshivas were hemorrhaging. The defections were many, and those who defected were of enormous consequence. And he went to Germany, and he went to the university at Heidelberg and at Freiburg. At Freiburg University, there was a Rav, a Lithuanian Rav by the name of Shapiro, who came from a famous Lithuanian family of Rabbonim. And he was a Talmud Chacham, and he was a great Rav, and he dropped the Rabbonis and religion and everything and became a professor of mathematics in the German University of Freiburg. And so there are two ways to look at it. One way to look at it is that he was a traitor. The other way to look at it is that he was the rabbi who made good. Because in Germany, if you were a tenured professor at a major university in the early 1900s, I mean, that was you couldn't make it any better than that. And he went to study by this Shapiro. And many yeshiva students from Eastern Europe ended up by this man. Again, it's hard for us to put ourselves in that frame of mind and in those circumstances and to understand, but he was a role model. The interesting thing was that even though they were not religious and they were not Shomer Shabbos, and many of them didn't believe anymore in anything, they used to learn Gemara with him every day because he loved learning. He had a tremendous head. He was a great lamban. So they would learn. They would learn without a yarmulke. They would learn on Shabbos smoking a cigarette. But they would learn, which is also to us unimaginable, because by us we associate learning only with the religious experience of it, whereas they associated it purely with the intellectual experience. And this David Cohen, received his PhD, and he then studied philosophy. He received a second PhD in philosophy. But when he was 26 years old, he came to Basel, and he was invited to be a professor at the university in Basel, and he held two chairs, one in mathematics and one in philosophy. And he was a goy gomer. He was, he wasn't Jewish. He met Rav Kook. So he had a chance meeting at a home in Zurich, and Rav Kook took one look at him. He writes the story. Rav Kook took one look at him, looked him in the eyes, and he told him, "Was machst du sich narrisch?" So what are you making a fool out of yourself? And from that day on, he never left Rav Kook's side. Wherever Rav Kook went, and as tshuva for what he had done, so he took upon himself the vows of being a Nazir. He never drank wine. He never cut his hair or his beard, though he did marry and have children. His children are in hertzel today. His son-in-law is Rav Shor Yoshev. His son is Rav Shor Yoshev Cohen, the Rav of Haifa. But he was a genius. An absolute genius. And he was Rav Kook's genius. So Rav Kook said that that's why he came to Switzerland. God sent him to Switzerland to pull this guy out. So again, that's a Jewish way of looking at it, right? So according to Rav Kook, the First World War, listen to the Hertzel, the First World War, and being caught outside of Eretz Yisrael, everything is only because God said, you got to get this guy, we got to save him, you got to take him out. So it's worth it in God's world that there should be a 4-year bloodbath that he should get pulled out. Now that's a Jewish. You can't say that on the street. You can't even say it to Jews. They look at you like you're crazy. But that's how God thinks. And we see the same, Rav Kook illustrated it. I've mentioned it many times. I mentioned it in the yeshiva always, that we see the story of Joseph and his brothers. So in order to reunite Joseph and his brothers, so God brings a famine on the world. He makes Egypt the major empire. He introduces feudalism. The Pharaoh falls. The clergy take a whole, if somebody would write it up, right? Write up the history. Read Breasted history of the ancient world. The whole thing turned over. The Chumash doesn't say anything about that. It just says that Joseph had to meet his brothers, right? So that's what happened. That's the Jewish way of looking at it. That's God's way of looking at it. So that's the pshat, kol ha'olam kulo and berel b'shvili. The whole world is only for one person, right? So that's the one person. In 1916, Rav Kook was invited to London to become the rabbi of the Federated Jewish Synagogues. In England, there are two main sets of Orthodox synagogues. There's the United Synagogue, which is the mainline, mainstream, aristocratic, majority synagogue, that has the chief rabbi. Rabbi Hertzel was the chief rabbi, Rabbi Adler, Rabbi Brody, now Rabbi Jacobovitz. And then there was the Eastern European Jews who never quite anglicized themselves. Someone when I was in England told me that the difference between the two is a shmita, like he said. That a little snuff, right? That in the Federated Synagogue you could still get you get a pinch of snuff yet. But whatever, it was a cultural difference, but it also had real religious nuances different. And Rav Kook came to be the Rav of the Federated Synagogues, which was a tremendous boost for them, because Rav Kook, again, there was no room for anybody else to be the Rav in town when Rav Kook was there. It's just not fair. And Rav Kook, 3 years in England were years of tremendous accomplishment for the English Jewish community. And there Rav Kook met Weitzman, who was also in England at the time, and was working for the Balfour Declaration. And Rav Kook felt that the Balfour Declaration, again, was part of this messianic process. And he encouraged Weitzman in it. And on the day that the Balfour Declaration was declared, Rav Kook declared it a holiday for the Jews in England. But not only Rav Kook, the Chofetz Chaim's son, in his biography regarding his father, says that on the day of the Balfour Declaration, his father put on the Chofetz Chaim dressed in Big Day Shabbos. Put on Shabbos clothing, and he said, the son quotes his father, Baron Pupko, quotes his father as saying that there's no question, he says, that the Messianic process has begun. He says we have to only pray that the secular Jews don't abort it. And that's how the great men saw again. So we look back at the Balfour Declaration, to us it looks like a cynical political move in the midst of the war to try and get some favor. The Zionists interpret it, they owed Weitzman a favor because he invented a fuse for the British shells. That isn't how Rav Kook saw it, and that isn't how the other Rabbonim saw it. They saw it as a fulfillment of the prophecy that nations of the world will agree that the Jewish people are entitled to Palestine. And that was one of the prerequisites to have a Jewish state, is that nations in the world, especially powerful nations in the world, and that time the English Empire, Great Britain was the nation in the world. So they saw it in those terms. They saw it, again, in cosmic terms. Not part of the problem is that we see, you see television, you hear the radio news, you read the newspaper, the magazine. So you see it always in two-dimensional terms. Today's news, That's it. There's no connection with yesterday and no connection with tomorrow, because tomorrow's going to be a different paper. But to be able to see world events in a cosmic view, in a historic view, to see where it fits in, to see it part of an enormous process and a great drama, it's like the example that I always use. Sometimes you hear a musical instrument. Let's say you hear the drummer who is playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So you hear the drummer practice, and he's only playing the drums. There's no other instruments. He's hitting the drums. You say, my God, what noise? I mean, what? There's no melody, there's nothing. You put the whole orchestra together, you hear the whole symphony, and the drummer comes in when he's supposed to come in. So then, what magnificence, what grandeur, what greatness. Well, here also, all the events that happen, you see the single event, you hear the drummer playing the symphony. So what kind of music is that? But if you have the whole picture, if you have the entire symphony, so then it's different. And that's at least the way Rav Kook saw it. Again, whether it is or it isn't, I'm certainly not in the position to judge. And in terms of history, we'll also see what happens. But that's how he saw it. And therefore, to him, the Balfour Declaration was an enormous achievement. It was an historic moment. And it's interesting that most Jews in the world felt that way too, instinctively. The Jews read much more in the Balfour Declaration than it said. But that was because of the fact that, again, Britain may have viewed the Balfour Declaration in this two-dimensional setting, right? It was one of the many promises that England made during the First World War. But the Jews saw it in an historic setting. They saw it in a prophetic setting. They saw it in a messianic setting, so to speak. And because of that, therefore, it has to take on greater trappings. It has to be more of an issue. Couldn't just be a little promise. And that, therefore, was more than anything else the turning point in Rav Kook's life, because now he felt that his vision, this messianic vision of Zionism that he had, and of what the Jewish world was going through, and the time that it was going to enter, he felt that all of that was somehow confirmed. He saw that God confirmed it, because look what happened. The greatest empire in the world said that His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine. And for a great government, a Christian government, the world's greatest empire, to say that already had a cosmic effect. That had an enormous effect far beyond just the words itself. Rav Kook was in London again for that, and he felt that was part of his reason for being in London. He should be a witness to that great event. So again, that built up within him his understanding of his role and his destiny and his future. And we'll see that immediately after the war, he makes every attempt to return to Palestine immediately in order to begin to fulfill that messianic dream which he saw now. One of the outstanding facets of Kook's personality was that he always dreamt in great dreams, in enormous scope of things. And therefore he, perhaps more than any other figure of his time, attempted to change the entire structure of the Jewish people and of the Jewish rabbinate. And this naturally could not be done without controversy and without taking on the established positions and the establishment both on the right and on the left, on all the spectrums of the Jewish people. When Rav Kook returned to Yerushalayim in 1920, he was elected the Rav of Yerushalayim. Now, the Rav of Yerushalayim was elected by a council that was made up of most of the institutions of Yerushalayim, the hospitals, the synagogues, the institutions of Yerushalayim were the ones that voted, and he was granted the title of being Rabbi of Jerusalem. This is before there was any chief rabbinate, before there was any official type of organization established. So he was elected the Rabbi of Jerusalem. Now, not everybody agreed with his election. The truth be said, nobody agrees with the election of any rabbi. You don't have a 100% unanimous vote. Usually, therefore, the fact that there are dissenters is not a significant matter, because as often happens in life, sometimes the dissenters are the ones that become the greatest supporters or the greatest friends of the rabbi whom they voted against at the original election. However, here the opposition to Rav Kook was not personal. The opposition to Rav Kook was very ideological, because Rav Kook as a person was almost unassailable. And therefore, it was ideological. Sometimes I think that if he would have been less perfect, he would have had an easier time. Because then people would have been able to say that, he's interested in power, or he's interested in prestige, or he's interested in money, or all the other things that are said about rabbis. And that helps deflect the ideological contest. But here, since Rav Kook was so above everything, he was beyond money and power and prestige and all of the usual problems that human beings, especially human beings in positions of public view, suffer from. Because of all of that, it was a pure ideological struggle. And a pure ideological struggle, especially amongst Jews, always has bitter and many times violent overtones. Because we are discussing very important matters, matters that transcend the here and now, and therefore the issue becomes a great and strong issue. For that reason, the A Y Hacohen Kook, which represented the old yeshuv in Yerushalayim, and which was the anti-Zionist yeshuv, and which had really previously been the source of power for the rabbinate in Yerushalayim, and now it was outdone completely by the secular forces and by other religious forces and by the Zionist forces. It's a very strange situation that pertains, as I'll discuss later, but in Israel, you have a lot of people who don't believe in God and in Judaism and in rabbis electing the rabbis. And because of that, therefore, it's certain strange things occur. But in any event, the A Y Hacohen Kook strongly objected to Rav Kook's election on ideological grounds. The leader of the A Y Hacohen Kook was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, who was one of the great Gaonim and Tzaddikim. He was a Talmud of the Ksav Sofer, and he was a Czechoslovakian Jew, and was well known in Yerushalayim for his piety and for his unbending, strong leadership especially in matters of religion and in his opposition to Zionism. he had joined with Rav Kook in the Masa Tshuva, in the visit of the three rabbis, Rav Kook, Rav Chalap, and Rav Sonnenfeld, in early 1914 to the kibbutzim and moshavot to try and bring a modicum of Judaism into the new settlement. And he and Rav Kook got along on a personal level very well. In fact, when Rav Kook was installed, Rav Sonnenfeld came to the installation ceremony, and when Rav Kook first spoke in the old Churva Shul in Yerushalayim, so Rav Sonnenfeld came for the drasha, and the drasha was after Mincha, and they gave Rav Sonnenfeld Shlishi. Rav Kook had Kohen, I forget, another famous man, Binyamin HaLevi, had Levi, and Rav Sonnenfeld had Shlishi. So between them there was a personal bond of appreciation and friendship, of recognition of greatness, and of also recognition of strong differences of opinion. But Rav Sonnenfeld never called Rav Kook the Rav of Yerushalayim. He always called him Yasser Rav, the Rav of Jaffa, which was his previous position. And this was all before the chief rabbinate. Once the chief rabbinate started, then the A Y Hacohen broke off completely and elected Rav Sonnenfeld as its Rav in Yerushalayim. A situation which pertains today, till today, that there's an official rabbi in Yerushalayim. Today it's Rav Kook. And then there is a Rav for the A Y Hacohen, a Rav for the Jews that are concentrated mainly in Mea Shorim and Geula, but that really have influence everywhere in Israel. And that today is Rav Weiss, who was formerly the Rav in England. And there was a time when the Satmar Rav was the Rav. But that the official rabbi in Jerusalem is not the rabbi of Beit. Now Rav Kook did not trim his sails. He did not attempt to compromise on any of his ideological matters. And because of that, therefore, as I mentioned, even though there was a great deal of personal affection and approbation between Rav Kook and Rav Sonnenfeld, and even between Rav Kook and many of the other leaders of Beit Achreidis, ideologically they were locked in a battle from which there was no compromise. What happened was that many times this conflict degenerated. Unfortunately, the nature, not only in Jerusalem but in other places, of using slander, of publishing letters, of putting placards and notices on the wall, and of very insulting things which cannot be justified, occurred. It was even to the extent where pots of water were thrown on Rav Kook from streets that he passed. So it was a very, very bitter struggle, not an easy struggle at all, and it was reflected in very bitter fashion. It was such an extent that in many respects the European Rabbonim, even those who opposed Rav Kook ideologically, were very critical of the methods that were used to fight him in the land of Israel. Now, he had this great dream of the chief rabbinate. He had a dream before of a party called Degel Yerushalayim, of a party that was not Mizrahi and it was not Aguda, of a party that would rise above the fray and that would attempt to unite the Jewish people, that would act positively towards Zionism, but would attempt to infuse it with the tradition and holiness of Torah and Torah observance. How he intended to do this, all ideas sound grand. The practicality of the matter is sometimes hard to achieve. His famous slogan was that he wanted to renew the old and he wanted to sanctify the new. Again, that's a great slogan, but the methods for so doing oftentimes escape us. And his idea of the rabbinate was that if there would be an organized rabbinate in the land of Israel, and that the rabbi, so to speak, would be able to address problems with one voice, there would be a chief supreme court, not in the idea of a Sanhedrin as later was discussed when the state of Israel was established for a short period of time, but the idea of a supreme rabbinic court, an idea of a system that would make the position of the rabbi more exalted, less dependent upon the whims of certain individuals. The structure itself